This is the same meal, the same portions, the same calories. But if you change the order you eat it, your blood sugar response can change dramatically. A Japanese study using continuous glucose monitors found that eating rice at the end of the meal, rather than first, significantly reduced post-meal glucose spikes. So here's the simple rule. Start with your salad, vegetables, or protein. Then eat the starchy part. And if a restaurant drops bread on the table first, don't touch it. Drink water, eat the salad, wait for the main. One tiny behavior change, no dieting, no smaller portions, yet it can flatten your glucose curve every single meal. If you have diabetes or prediabetes, there is a very good chance someone has already told you to stop eating rice, bread, and potatoes. Maybe your doctor said it. Maybe your family said it. Maybe you saw it online so many times that you started believing those foods were the enemy. And at first, the advice sounds logical. Carbohydrates raise blood sugar, so removing carbohydrates should solve the problem. But here is what most people never stop to think about. Rice, bread, and potatoes are not occasional foods. They are the foundation of daily meals for billions of people around the world. Asking someone to eliminate them forever is not simple advice. For many older adults, it becomes exhausting, frustrating, and impossible to maintain long-term. And this is exactly where the real danger begins. Many seniors spend years trying strict diets that make them miserable. They avoid the foods they love. They force themselves to eat meals that never satisfy them. Eventually, they become tired of constantly restricting themselves. They give up. And when they give up, their blood sugar often becomes worse than before. I have seen this happen again and again with patients who believed they had failed, when in reality, they were simply following strategies that were too extreme to sustain in real life. But what if the problem is not the rice itself? What if the problem is how the rice is prepared, combined, and eaten? Because this is where the science becomes incredibly interesting. The same bowl of rice can create two completely different blood sugar responses, depending on what you do before you eat it. The same potato can affect your metabolism very differently, based on how it was cooked and cooled. Even bread can behave differently inside your body, depending on preparation methods that most people have never heard about. And once you understand these mechanisms, everything changes. Suddenly, managing blood sugar stops feeling like punishment. It becomes strategy instead of suffering. You stop fighting against your body and start working with it. My name is Dr. Miller. I have spent decades studying preventive medicine, aging, and metabolic disease. And today, I want to show you evidence-based techniques that can reduce post-meal blood sugar spikes by as much as 40% without forcing you to completely give up rice, bread, or potatoes. Some of these methods are so simple that you can start using them tonight with the food already sitting in your kitchen. So stay with me until the end of this video, because what you are about to learn could completely change the way you think about carbohydrates, diabetes, and the foods you believed you had to fear forever. Now let us talk about one of the most overlooked tools for controlling blood sugar, something called resistant starch. Most people with diabetes have never heard of it, yet it may completely change the way your body responds to foods like rice, potatoes, and bread. To understand why this matters, you first need to understand what normally happens when you eat freshly cooked starches. When hot white rice, soft bread, or steaming potatoes enter your digestive system, the starch is rapidly broken down into glucose. That glucose moves into your bloodstream very quickly, causing a sharp spike in blood sugar. Your pancreas then has to release large amounts of insulin to manage the surge. Over time, these repeated spikes place enormous stress on the body. Insulin resistance becomes worse, blood sugar becomes harder to control, and the cycle continues day after day. But resistant starch behaves very differently inside the body. Instead of being quickly digested, it resists breakdown in the small intestine and acts more like fiber. Rather than flooding your bloodstream with glucose, much of it travels into the large intestine, where it feeds beneficial gut bacteria. These bacteria then produce compounds called short-chain fatty acids, especially one known as butyrate. And butyrate is incredibly important for metabolic health. Research shows it helps reduce inflammation, strengthens the gut lining, and improves insulin sensitivity, allowing your cells to respond more effectively to insulin signals. What makes this fascinating is that you can create more resistant starch using foods you already eat every week. I once worked with a patient in his 70s who loved rice and believed he had to completely avoid it forever. Every time he ate freshly cooked his glucose monitor showed dramatic spikes afterward. But after changing only one habit, his readings improved noticeably within days. Instead of eating rice immediately after cooking it, he began refrigerating it overnight and reheating it the next day. The amount of rice stayed exactly the same, but his blood sugar response became far more stable. Here is why this works. When cooked starches cool down, part of the starch changes structure through a process called retrogradation. The starch becomes more resistant to digestion, meaning less glucose enters the bloodstream rapidly. Even after reheating, a meaningful portion of that resistant starch remains. The practical application is simple. Cook rice, potatoes, or pasta, cool them overnight in the refrigerator, then reheat them before eating. Bread can also change this way. Freezing bread and then toasting it increases resistant starch compared to eating it fresh. Certain foods naturally contain high amounts as well, including beans, lentils, steel-cut oats, and slightly green bananas. But this is only half of the story, because the next thing that determines your blood sugar response may matter even more than how the carbohydrate itself is prepared. What truly changes the game is what you eat together with those carbohydrates. Now let us move to the second strategy, and this may be one of the most important concepts in the entire discussion. Never eat carbohydrates alone, because the moment you eat rice, bread, crackers, or potatoes by themselves, your digestive system breaks those starches down extremely fast. Glucose rushes into the bloodstream, insulin surges upward, and your blood sugar spikes sharply within a short period of time. This is exactly the kind of metabolic stress that slowly worsens insulin resistance over the years. But something remarkable happens when carbohydrates are combined with protein, healthy fat, and fiber. The entire digestive process begins to slow down. Food stays in the stomach longer, a process called slower gastric emptying. Instead of glucose flooding into the bloodstream all at once, it enters gradually and steadily. The spike becomes smaller, smoother, and easier for the body to handle. Protein also stimulates the release of a hormone called GLP-1. This hormone helps regulate appetite, slows digestion, and improves insulin response. In fact, some modern diabetes medications work by targeting this exact pathway. But your body can naturally stimulate GLP-1 simply through smart food combinations. Fat works similarly. Healthy fats slow the movement of food through the digestive tract, reducing how quickly starch is converted into glucose. Fiber adds another layer of protection by physically slowing glucose absorption in the intestines. Together, protein, fat, and fiber create a metabolic buffer around carbohydrates. This is why a bowl of rice with beans produces a far gentler blood sugar response than plain white rice alone. The beans provide protein, fiber, and resistant starch that slow digestion dramatically. The same principle applies to potatoes. Potatoes eaten alone can create a very rapid glucose spike. But potatoes eaten with olive oil, salmon, eggs, or avocado behave very differently inside the body. There is another simple trick that many people completely overlook. Adding acidic foods to a meal can further reduce the blood sugar response. Vinegar, lemon juice, lime juice, kimchi, sauerkraut, and miso all contain compounds that help slow starch digestion. Acetic acid, the active component in vinegar, may also improve insulin sensitivity and reduce glucose production in the liver after meals. I once had a patient who insisted he barely ate carbohydrates anymore, yet his glucose monitor still showed large spikes every evening. When we reviewed his meals carefully, the problem became obvious. He was eating only a small amount of bread, but he ate it completely by itself as a snack. No protein, no fiber, no fat, just bread alone. Once he started pairing it with Greek yogurt, nuts, or boiled eggs, his blood sugar readings immediately became more stable. And this is the emotional trap many people fall into. They believe they are eating very little carbohydrate, yet they continue creating dangerous glucose spikes simply because they combine foods incorrectly. The body does not only care about how many carbohydrates you eat, it also cares deeply about what those carbohydrates are eaten with. You may be surprised to hear this, but you can reduce your post-meal blood sugar spike by up to 40% without changing the foods on your plate. Same rice, same potatoes, same bread. The only thing you change is the order in which you eat them. And for many people with diabetes or prediabetes, this simple habit becomes one of the fastest ways to improve glucose stability throughout the day. Most people begin meals with the starch first. They reach for the breadbasket before the entree arrives. They take several bites of rice before touching the vegetables or protein. But when carbohydrates hit an empty digestive system first, glucose enters the bloodstream extremely quickly. The spike begins almost immediately, and the pancreas must work harder to release enough insulin to manage the surge. Now here is where the science becomes fascinating. When you eat vegetables and protein before carbohydrates, your digestion slows down naturally. Fiber from vegetables and protein from foods like fish, eggs, chicken, tofu, or beans delays gastric emptying, meaning food leaves the stomach more gradually. Instead of glucose rushing into the bloodstream in one large wave, it enters slowly and steadily. The result is a smaller blood sugar spike and a lower insulin response after the meal. Researchers have tested this directly in people with type 2 diabetes. In one controlled study, participants ate the exact same meal on different days. The only difference was meal order. When they ate vegetables and protein first and carbohydrates last, their post-meal glucose spike dropped by nearly 40%. Even more impressive, their insulin response decreased by around 31%. Think about that carefully. The food did not change. The calories did not change. Only the sequence changed. Yet the metabolic outcome looked dramatically different. I often explain this to patients using the image of traffic entering a highway. If thousands of cars try entering all at once, congestion happens immediately. But if the cars enter slowly in smaller groups, traffic flows much more smoothly. Your bloodstream works the same way with glucose. The practical application is extremely simple. If you are eating at a restaurant, start with the salad or vegetables first. Drink water slowly. Let the bread basket sit untouched for several minutes instead of reaching for it automatically. Then eat your protein before moving to the rice, pasta, or potatoes. At home, try eating meat, fish, eggs, tofu, or vegetables before taking your first bites of rice or bread. You are not removing the carbohydrate. You are changing the environment your body encounters before processing it. And here is what many people never realize. Even when you choose the right foods and eat them in the right order, the next 10 minutes after your meal may influence your blood sugar even more than the meal itself. That is why the next strategy may surprise you most of all. It does not involve supplements, dieting, or exercise routines. In fact, it takes a few minutes and can begin lowering glucose immediately after eating. And once you understand how your muscles remove sugar from bloodstream, you will never look at post-meal movement way again. For most people with diabetes, the most dangerous blood sugar rise does not happen while they are sleeping. It does not happen in the middle of the night. It happens in the first 1 to 2 hours after eating. This is the moment when glucose rapidly floods into the bloodstream, and if the body cannot clear it efficiently, blood sugar remains elevated far longer than it should. Repeated over months and years, these post-meal spikes place enormous stress on the pancreas, worsen insulin resistance, and quietly damage blood vessels throughout the body. But here is the remarkable part. One of the most effective tools for lowering post-meal glucose is not a medication, a supplement, or an extreme workout. It is simply movement. Specifically, light movement immediately after eating. When you walk after a meal, your muscles begin pulling glucose directly from the bloodstream to use as fuel. And one muscle in particular plays an extraordinary role in this process. It is called the soleus muscle, the deep muscle located in your calf. Unlike many other muscles that tire quickly, The soleus is designed for long periods of gentle activity, like standing and walking. Scientists sometimes describe it as a metabolic engine hidden inside the lower leg. What makes the soleus so important for people with diabetes is that it can absorb glucose without relying heavily on insulin. In other words, even if your body is insulin resistant, this muscle still helps remove sugar from the bloodstream through muscle contraction alone. It acts almost like a sponge, soaking up excess glucose after meals. I once worked with an older patient in his late 70s who struggled with high fasting blood sugar every morning. He assumed he needed stricter dieting, but instead of drastically changing his meals, we focused on one small habit. After every dinner, he began taking a slow 10-minute walk around his neighborhood. Nothing intense, no sweating, no gym membership, just gentle movement after eating. Within several weeks, his fasting glucose readings began improving consistently, not because he eliminated all carbohydrates, but because his body was finally clearing glucose more efficiently after meals. And this effect has been confirmed repeatedly in research studies. Even short walks after eating significantly reduce post-meal glucose levels compared to remaining seated. The timing matters too. The earlier you move after finishing a meal, the more effectively your muscles intercept the glucose before the spike becomes too large. The good news is that it does not need to be formal exercise. A 10-minute walk is excellent, but many forms of light activity work. Cleaning the kitchen, standing while talking on the phone, climbing stairs slowly, gardening, or walking around the house can all help activate these glucose-clearing mechanisms. The key idea is simple. Do not remain completely still after eating. And this is where many older adults become discouraged unnecessarily. They believe blood sugar control requires exhausting workouts or complicated fitness routines. But that is not true. You do not need a gym. You do not need running shoes. You do not need intense exercise programs. You simply need your body to avoid becoming motionless after meals. Sometimes the smallest daily habits create the most powerful metabolic changes of all. One of the biggest misunderstandings about diabetes is the belief that all carbohydrates are equally harmful. They are not. In many cases, the quality and structure of the carbohydrate matters far more than the total amount alone. Two foods may contain similar carbohydrate numbers on a nutrition label, yet create completely different blood sugar responses inside the body. I often explain this using a simple analogy. Imagine throwing sawdust into a fire. It burns instantly with a sudden burst of heat and flames. That is what highly processed carbohydrates do inside your body. White bread, pastries, crackers, sugary cereals, and foods made from finely milled white flour are absorbed extremely fast. Glucose enters the bloodstream almost immediately, creating sharp spikes that force the pancreas to release large amounts of insulin very quickly. Now compare that to placing a solid log onto a fire. The log burns slowly, steadily, and over a much longer period of time. Whole grains and minimally processed carbohydrates behave in a similar way. Because their natural structure remains more intact, digestion happens gradually. Glucose enters the bloodstreams at a slower pace, creating a smoother and more stable blood sugar curve. This difference comes down largely to processing. When grains are ground into ultra-fine flour, digestive enzymes can attack almost the entire surface area immediately. The starch becomes easy to absorb very quickly. But intact grains contain fibrous outer layers and natural structures that slow down digestion dramatically. This is why choosing the right carbohydrate sources matters so much. Steel-cut oats are metabolized far more slowly than instant oatmeal packets. Barley and legumes provide fiber and resistant starch that help stabilize glucose levels. Brown rice generally produces a gentler response than freshly cooked white rice because more of the grain structure remains intact. True whole grain bread, especially dense bread with visible grains and seeds, behaves very differently from soft processed sandwich bread. Legumes deserve special attention here because they are one of the most metabolically beneficial carbohydrate sources available. Beans, lentils, and chickpeas contain fiber, protein, and resistant starch all together in one food. This combination slows glucose absorption naturally, while also improving fullness and supporting gut health. But here is the hidden danger that many people never realize. Food marketing can be extremely misleading. I cannot tell you how many patients proudly show me a loaf of healthy whole wheat bread that is actually made mostly from refined white flour with added coloring to make it appear darker and healthier. The packaging says multigrain or wheat bread, but the metabolic effect inside the body is often very similar to ordinary white bread. This is why reading ingredient labels matters. Look for breads where whole grains are listed as the first ingredient, not enriched wheat flour. Choose foods with texture, density, and visible grain structure instead of products that feel soft, fluffy, and overly processed. And this is the key point I want you to remember. The goal is not to fear carbohydrates. The goal is to choose carbohydrates that work with your metabolism instead of overwhelming it. Because when you consistently replace highly processed starches with slower digesting whole food carbohydrates, your blood sugar becomes more stable, your hunger decreases, and your body begins responding to food in a much healthier way over time. Here is something that surprises many people with diabetes. The exact same meal eaten at 9 o'clock at night can produce a much worse blood sugar response than if that identical meal were eaten at 6 o'clock in the evening. Same rice, same bread, same calories, but completely different metabolic consequences inside the body. Most people think blood sugar control depends only on what they eat. But your body also cares deeply about when you eat. Human metabolism follows a circadian rhythm, an internal biological clock that changes hormone levels and insulin sensitivity throughout the day. In the morning and early afternoon, your body is generally more efficient at handling glucose. Insulin works better. Muscle cells absorb sugar more effectively, and the pancreas responds more efficiently after meals. But as evening approaches, this entire system begins slowing down. Insulin sensitivity naturally declines later in the day, meaning your cells become less responsive to insulin signals. At the same time, another hormone called melatonin starts increasing as your body prepares for sleep. Most people know melatonin as the hormone that helps regulate sleep cycles, but few realize it also affects blood sugar control directly. Melatonin interacts with receptors on pancreatic beta cells, the cells responsible for producing insulin. As melatonin levels rise in the evening, insulin secretion becomes weaker. So now you have two problems happening simultaneously. Your body is becoming more insulin resistant, and your pancreas is producing less insulin at the exact time you are eating dinner or late-night snacks. This creates the perfect environment for prolonged glucose elevation. Sugar remains in the bloodstream much longer than it would earlier in the day. Overnight, elevated glucose continues circulating while the body should be recovering and repairing itself during sleep. By morning, fasting blood sugar levels are often significantly higher. I once worked with a man in his 60s who was frustrated because his fasting glucose remained elevated despite improving his diet. He had reduced sugary foods, controlled portion sizes, and even started walking regularly after meals. But one habit remained unchanged. He routinely ate dinner around 9:30 at night, then went to bed shortly afterward. When he shifted dinner earlier to around 6:30 and stopped eating within 3 hours of sleep, his morning glucose readings improved within weeks without changing the foods themselves. The solution here is simple but extremely powerful. Try to finish your last meal at least 3 hours before bedtime whenever possible. This gives your body time to process glucose while insulin sensitivity is still relatively stronger, and before melatonin reaches higher nighttime levels. Earlier dinners consistently lead to more stable overnight glucose patterns and lower fasting blood sugar the next morning. And if your schedule sometimes forces later meals, avoid very large portions of refined carbohydrates late at night. Keep dinners lighter, balanced with protein, vegetables, and healthy fats whenever possible. I want you to remember something important here. Your body is not broken. Many people with diabetes blame themselves when their glucose remains difficult to control. But often the body is simply trying to process food at a biologically difficult time. Once you begin aligning your meals with your natural metabolic rhythms instead of fighting against them, blood sugar management often becomes far easier than most people expect. Let us bring everything together now, because the most important message I want you to remember is this. Managing diabetes does not have to mean living in constant fear of rice, bread, or potatoes. The goal is not punishment. The goal is understanding. Once you understand how your body processes carbohydrates, you can make smarter decisions that are sustainable for real life instead of following extreme diets that leave you frustrated and exhausted. Today, we covered 7 powerful strategies that can dramatically improve blood sugar control without forcing you to completely eliminate the foods you love. First, cool and reheat your carbohydrates whenever possible. Rice, potatoes, pasta, and even bread change structure after cooling, creating resistant starch that behaves more like fiber and produces a gentler glucose response. Second, never eat carbohydrates alone. Pair them with protein, healthy fats, and fiber to slow digestion and to reduce the speed at which glucose enters the bloodstream. Third, add acidic foods like vinegar, lemon juice, kimchi, or miso to meals. These simple additions can help slow starch digestion and improve insulin sensitivity naturally. Fourth, pay attention to the order in which you eat. Start meals with vegetables and protein first, then eat carbohydrates afterward. This one behavioral change alone can significantly flatten post-meal blood sugar spikes. Fifth, move your body after eating. A simple 10-minute walk can activate muscles that pull glucose directly from the bloodstream, helping lower blood sugar naturally without medication. Sixth, choose higher quality carbohydrates whenever possible. Whole grains, legumes, steel-cut oats, brown rice, and true whole grain bread provide slower, steadier energy than heavily processed white flour products. And seventh, avoid eating too close to bedtime. Giving your body at least 3 hours between dinner and sleep allows glucose to be processed more efficiently before your natural nighttime insulin resistance increases. Now, I know some people watching this may feel discouraged. Maybe you have struggled with blood sugar for years. Maybe you feel like you have already tried everything. But please hear me carefully when I say this. Your body is not failing you. In many cases, it has simply been overwhelmed by modern eating patterns that work against human biology. You do not need to fear every carbohydrate. You do not need to follow extreme restrictions forever. You do not need to remove every comfort food from your life just to improve your glucose levels. Often, the biggest improvements come from small daily habits repeated consistently over time. That is how real long-term health changes happen. Not through perfection, through understanding, through strategy, through learning how to work with your metabolism, instead of constantly fighting against it. If this video helped you see carbohydrates and diabetes differently, I hope you will subscribe and join me for future discussions on healthy aging, blood sugar control, and metabolic health. And please share this video with someone you care about, who has been told only what they cannot eat, without ever being taught how to eat more intelligently. And before you go, I would love to hear from you. Which strategy are you most interested in trying first? Cooling and reheating rice? Walking after meals? Eating dinner earlier? Leave a comment below and let us know. Your experience may help someone else begin making healthier changes starting today.